something I was even thinking about when I was getting ready. And when Cassie had said the masterpiece, I started to think, and I started to think hard on masterpieces and different things. And I realized my great uncle Bob, that one of the biggest paintings I ever remember in my whole growing up childhood life is one he did. Now, my uncle, great uncle Bob, everybody has to have that, what you call maybe eccentric uncle or something in their family. Um, he's my great uncle, so he was my grandparents' age, of course, and he had a story, and it's not all a happy story. I don't know all of his story, but I can tell you the parts I remember. And the parts I remember is he lived with my grandpa and grandma. And I know for a fact that he was in the World War II. He was a radio operator, and he fell in love with the radios. He had a little trailer house. I'm going to call it a trailer house. I don't exactly know because it was only like 15 feet long, but they called it a trailer house back at that time. He had one of those that was his workshop. And his workshop, if you were tiny and skinny, you could get through the door in maybe 2.5 feet. That was it. Okay? Because anytime anybody was getting rid of one of those old TVs or transformer radios, where the transformer was all these big glass jar bulb type things, which I know none of the younger ones understand, but he had all of them. He saved any of them that were good because he might need them to fix something later on. He saved it all. And then I remember when I was about 5 years old, maybe 6 years old, when we moved back, about 5 when we moved back from Nebraska, where I had been living back to by my grandparents. We lived in the little house. Okay. So we lived in the little house on the farm, and it had 2 bedrooms. That was it, 2 bedrooms. And I had the downstairs bedroom, and I'm sure I must have had a sister or two in there, but I cannot remember it, to be honest. And then my mom and dad were upstairs. Well, at some point, it came to the conclusion, and I was trying to remember between which sister it was, and I think it was after sister number 4 was born. There was a decision that we were going to do the house swap. Grandpa and grandma would move to the little house because they had no kids, and we'd move to the big house that had 5 bedrooms, the swap. And I remember getting it all geared up, and we had to do the timing, and I don't remember if it was spring or fall, but I know it was not during haying season. I can tell you that hands down, it was not during haying season. Okay. And I remember loading everything up on the back of that old big farm truck, which I came to hate later in my life. But at the time, when I was 6, it was kind of cool. But, you know, at 16, it was not cool. Can I just say, to have to go drive the big farm truck? Anyway, we did the swap. And what I remember about the swap is I was supposed to get the room where Uncle Bob was living. And it took him 3 weeks to get his stuff swapped. To get everybody else was swapped. We were all swapped within one day. I mean, literally, grandma and mom had swapped everything in one day except for Uncle Bob. He had not swapped yet. And then after that, we had to try to get his little trailer thing down to the next place. And I don't remember all the details, but I remember vaguely it taking the skidder, the loader, and a tractor with forks. And the best I can think is they picked it up, one on each end, and one went forward and one went backwards, and they just hauled it down and then unloaded it again. That's what I really think in my mind I remember. But again, I said I was kind of young, so that part I don't remember as much. But I remember a painting he did. And he had done several paintings. But the one I remember, and I don't even remember all the details, again, very young. The one I remember had a boy and a girl in it, and they were holding hands and they were walking in green. That's what it was. And I remembered that. And I called my mom last night. I said, I'm not imagining things, right? I do remember this. She's like, oh, yeah, yeah. I'm like, and it was on the wall. And I could tell her where it was on the wall. Yes, it was. It hung there for years. And I'm like, okay, good. I got that part. I still remember all those things. But this uncle, I mean, he was eccentric, and I loved him. I mean, I'm not even going to lie. Probably still love him. But, he had a really rough time. He was in the World War II. He came home. He had a young son. They had a young son the same age as my mom. His name was Bobby, named after his dad, Bob, of course. Um, and his wife decided to just leave him. So now he's on his own. He has his young son. They moved in with my grandpa and grandma. So now there's the two only children who now actually kind of have a sibling, but they're not a sibling, kind of that thing. So my cousin and my mom grew up together. But my Uncle Bob, he he had a way of doing things none of the rest of us could ever do. I mean, even in my adult life, it still amazes me things he did. But he also had those, quirks that made him eccentric. Like he would be walking down the road because it was a quarter mile between the two houses, and he'd be walking down the road and he'd just find money laying on the ground. We added it up. He found over $5,000 throughout the years in money just laying on the ground. And I'm like, what do you do? And he's like, I'm just walking along and there it is. Well, every time I walked between those two houses, I never found a dime. I'm telling you. I mean, but he also, other things. Like one time my grandpa forgot to put the gas can, no, the gas tank lid on the tractor. He set it above it. And he didn't put it on. He walked to the entire cornfield and he found it. Dad had already sent us kids out. Well, I mean, that's valid. He sent kids out. We were like 7 and 8, those type of ages. We never found it, but he did. And he would, before we had the step saver in the barn, which a step saver is just a big can with a lot of hose. But the idea was before pipelines, which was when I learned to milk, pre-pipelines, you would take your cans of milk, carry them to the other end of the barn, take them through the strainer, dump them in the tank, go back, put the milk on the next cow. Anyway, the step saver happened to be you could just carry your big spot to dump out to where you were milking, and then you would come back. Well, Uncle Bob hated the step saver, even though Dad thought it was wonderful. He refused to use it. He would still carry the cans all the way to, and he never put on any of the milkers. He only carried cans the entire time. He would just carry cans. And Dad would say we could use that. He's like, nope. He would just carry the cans anyway. Things like that. But that's what I remember about my great Uncle Bob. But he was an artist in his own way. And when he was an artist, there were lots of things that go with it, but he did. And that picture of the boy and the girl, that is still the one I remember the most, is that exact picture. But as I was thinking about artists, and I already told you my art knowledge is very limited. I mean, I tried to take an art class once. I made it through maybe the first few pages, and I looked at my mom. She's like, I can't help you. I'm like, then I'm sunk. And we just set it to the side and went on to a different form of art. I can't draw. I don't paint. I don't sketch well, but I can sew. I can create you art that way, but I cannot just give me a paper. I mean, it's pathetic. Really, really, really is. My stick people don't even look happy. It's just not my thing. But there have been many artists in history. I was thinking about it, and I don't know all the artists, but I know of a few. I know Leonardo da Vinci, Vincent van Gogh, Michelangelo, Johannes Vermeer. However, I was thinking about what I was considered the greatest masterpiece ever. And I was thinking about that. A lot of people will say it's various pieces of art, but I was thinking about, for me personally, I would say the greatest masterpiece, without a doubt, would be the story, because art can be told in story or form, it just has to have a meaning to describe others, to feel the meaning. I would say the greatest story I could ever think of was the story of Jesus going to the cross. That would, to me, was the greatest masterpiece ever. And I was thinking about this, and when an artist starts their masterpiece, they don't just automatically jump up there and paint a beautiful picture. There is a ton of groundwork that is laid first. All the prep work has to be done before they actually even start to paint a stroke, not a single brush stroke. When Michelangelo was painting the ceiling on the Sistine Chapel, I doubt he started painting before the chapel went up. There had to be a ceiling to paint before he could paint. Valid, right? I mean, but even us, has anyone ever painted a room in their home? I can do that kind of painting, by the way. I can do that. Have you ever painted a room in your house? Do you just automatically get up and paint the room? There is a ton of prep work. And the older the house, the more prep work there is. I grew up in an extremely old farmhouse, and I remember my mom, we had this hallway over the steps. And it was a 2-story house, so of course the ceiling is really, really tall in there. And I remember my mom wanted to paint that ceiling so bad, so bad. And my dad kept telling her, don't touch it. you touch that ceiling, then we're going to have to redo that ceiling because that plaster is going to come crumbling on down. And I remember this discussion going on several years of my life. She finally found wallpaper to put on the walls. I mean, my mom found wallpaper. And the reason the story my mom finding wallpaper was so funny is she was one roll short. When she remeasured the second time, she needed one more roll. And she found it on clearance. And I want to say it was at like the Sherwin-Williams store. And my mom went back to see if they had one more roll in clearance. And we'd hunted through bins of rolled wallpaper. We're not talking a little bin, we're talking bins of wallpaper. And she found one more roll. And she was so excited and so happy. And she got in the car, backed up, and hit a light post. That is the part that was so, that would, us kids remember about that, is the car had that nice corner of blue paint for years. And, but she found one more, and we got it all up. We got all the wallpaper up. It was all done. It looked really good, but that ceiling was still really bothering Mom. And I remember one day she's like, let's start to paint it. I'm like, Mom, she's like, no, no, no. If we start, Dad will finish. So we got out the ladders, we got all this stuff, and she was right. Before we even got a single roll on that ceiling, Dad was in and he did it. And he made it. But you could tell he was so nervous painting that ceiling. But my point is, even when we do a wall, there is so much prep work. And like I said, the older the house, the more prep work we do. But, when we think about Jesus going to the cross, the greatest masterpiece, God did a lot of prep work before that happened. Many times we think about it, and we read the Bible, we talk about all those prophecies that came into place. And I was trying to think of the ones that I would say were the most. And I was thinking in Isaiah chapter 40, I believe it is, where it talks about Jesus. I can't find it because I was looking for it. It talks about Jesus coming, and it talks about John the Baptist coming, the one who will prepare the way for him and will make the spots for him to come. And then we go a little farther, and it talks about, in Isaiah chapter 43, it talks about, I even underlined it this morning so I could find it. It talks about how Jesus will come and he will be the shepherd and he will take care of his flock, and how he will care for the children and the little ones, and he will take care of them one piece at a time, and he will be with them. And, all those prophecies, and John the Baptist coming, and then comes the next part. You got the prep work done, it's been laid, and now here gets to come the fun part. And I didn't get to see my uncle paint very much, but my mom did a lot more than I did. But the color starts to come in, and we're getting to Jesus' story about how he's coming in the masterpiece. And Jesus starts adding all those little bits of color to his story. First comes the big one, Jesus being born. That's a big piece that goes in there on that masterpiece. And then we talk about his being baptized. That's another big piece. And how his ministry started. That's another little piece of color coming in. And then there's the 12 disciples. And we don't know, did he paint 7 brush strokes here and 5 over here? Or was it random brush strokes all over in this masterpiece that's being created? And then we go into all the parables and all the things Jesus did. And we have each one of those little tiny pieces that make that masterpiece so impressive. And then, he fed all the sick, fed all those people, and he healed so many sick. And he helped those that couldn't walk. And, he even let the little children come, and they let them sit on their knees. And that's all pieces of color that are going onto this great big canvas of Jesus's masterpiece. But the other thing I really, really noted in a masterpiece is they're not done instantly. Masterpieces are not done instantly. Even the masterpieces in our lives and what we're becoming, could anyone say that you were the same person today that you were 5 years ago? I'd like to think you're a better person today than you were 5 years ago, or that you know the Lord more today than you did 5 years ago. I'd like to say that. I'm praying that for myself, that I'm getting better every day, a little bit here, a little bit there. I don't expect to have great, huge changes in my life, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. But little pieces here, little pieces there. I'd like to keep thinking about it. But you know what? Something that Jesus did, and I find really important, is he took a few minutes and I don't know if you'd say stepped back, recharged, refreshed, but he did definitely take a break and he would go and he would regroup. And we see that several times in Jesus' ministry. He would just go away from everything else and he would step back and he would regroup. You know, my Uncle Bob, he was known for having times when he was very quiet. There would be days, and I know it's because a lot of things. I mean, he went to the war, he didn't come back the same. That happens, and it's a real thing. It really is. Um, there were other days that would be hard for him. We all knew on days that was his anniversary, we would not see him at all. We wouldn't have seen him at all that day. You know, special days we wouldn't see him, and that was okay. You could deal with that. But you know what? He had all that anxiety and things. And there were days he would just have to go away and regroup. And Jesus is the ultimate example of showing us that it is okay to have a day to just go away, refresh, regroup, rebuild. You know, we think about it, the storm of Jesus walking on the water. A lot of times we think about him walking on the water, but we forget why he wasn't with the disciples to begin with. He wasn't with them to begin with because he had fed all the multitudes, he had healed all the sick, he was worn out, he was tired. He's like, you guys get in the boat, you go, I'll catch up later. And he went and he prayed and he talked and he was with his father and he was doing what he felt was the most important thing at that time. And it was the most important thing at that time, was to go just take a break, refresh, and back up. Now, Michelangelo is known for painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, you know, and I can imagine, just follow me a minute. I'm sure he must have climbed that up and down that ladder at least 100 times a day because I can't foresee, maybe this is my brain not working here, how he could be painting the whole ceiling and seeing how it looks when he's up there. Sometimes you have to get way back. And I was looking up Michelangelo because I remember the Sistine Chapel. That is the limit of my art knowledge. You know, it's very small. We've already covered that. But I was reading about him, and they said there were times he would just lay on the floor and look up. And you know what? I can believe it. Just lay there and look. Get a look at the big picture again. Take a look at that great big picture. And Jesus definitely shows us the importance of getting away and talking to his father, especially when he was getting to the last step of his painting, his masterpiece. He's getting closer and closer and closer. And we know that because it starts out in Luke. I'm using Luke, but it is accounted in the other Gospels. But Luke in 22:39, it says, coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives as he was accustomed, and his disciples followed him. When he came to the place, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and saying, he knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if this is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. He had to go right at the end when he's getting close to the end of this painting, this masterpiece, and go take a look. Take a good step back, refresh, and get strong for what is coming next. In John chapter 17, he also continued, you know, he didn't just pray for himself when he went to pray those last prayers. He prayed for his disciples. He prayed for us. Did you know he was praying for us and we weren't even in existence yet? But he's still praying for us. I do not pray for these alone, but also for all those who will believe in me through their word, that they all may be one, as you, the Father, are in me, and as I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me, and that the glory which you gave me I've given them, that they may be one, just as we are one. He was praying for us even up to the end when he was getting ready to put the final piece on that masterpiece. Now, when you're doing a masterpiece, there's a few things, but right near the end, when the masterpiece is completed, Jesus is still building up here. He's still getting ready. He's doing the last thing. He goes, he prayed, he looked back, but now come those last little bits that make this such a tremendous masterpiece. It starts off, he gets arrested. We know the story. Most of us know the story. He gets arrested. He gets called in between the two leaders that day. He goes back and forth that night, in the dark. It's not even done publicly. It's done in the dark. He gets beaten. He gets whipped. He gets carried. He has to carry a cross. He stumbles. Someone else carries the cross, but he still goes all the way up that hill. He's on that cross. All of a sudden, the nails go in. The cross is there. He's hanging there. But you know what? He was still taking care of other things. He made sure his mother was taken care of. He talked to the thief on the cross. He still didn't dwell on just himself. He looked ahead to that final bit. In 1 John chapter 4, it says, I lost it. That I really had it and there it went. But it says, how God's loved us so much that he sent his son into the world so that as we have known and believed that God has loved us, God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God and God in him. He sent out his son for that last perfect thing to make sure that we would know that we were loved and that we were the most important thing. And Jesus, even when he's hanging on that cross, he's looking ahead to what the next part of that painting is going to be. And the next part of that masterpiece is going to be. And he's going forward and he's looking forward. And we're almost to the end, and Jesus is hanging there, and he is being there for us, and he's taking care of us, and he is praying. Even in the end, we can still see Jesus praying, and he's taking care of it. And the masterpiece is just about finished. It's close that Jesus was creating. But every masterpiece, there is one last thing. Every masterpiece in that corner, normally it's down on the bottom right-hand corner. Once in a while, an artist will do it in a different spot. They sign their name. And Jesus went and he did that last piece. He signed it for us when he died on the cross. He signed it. He made it permanent. He made it complete. He made it personal. And the thing about my uncle's painting is there's one, and it's hanging on a wall in my cousin's house. Is hanging on the wall. But Jesus made a masterpiece that each one of us gets to have. Because see, he wrote that masterpiece, but what he wrote that masterpiece and designed it is a masterpiece that goes on our hearts. Each and every one of us can accept that masterpiece and put it in our heart. So we always have it with us. See, because when Jesus died on that cross, he did it for each and every one of us personally. And as Christians, sometimes we think, oh, I know that, I'm saved, move on. But you know what? The truth is, we still need to remember every single day that he did that for me personally. And if you never accepted that, that is something you need to do today. Accept that Jesus did that for you personally. So a lot of times in the museums, you'll see the big fancy paintings and they have a limited edition. Well, let you know that there is no limit on this edition. Anyone can have it. Anyone can claim it. It can be anyone's forever. So my Uncle Bob, my great Uncle Bob, and sorry, he was an artist. And I was telling you about the painting he had with the two kids on the wall. And he always teased us. And he would say that this is Bobby and Susie. They're holding hands. See, they get along once in a while. That was what he always said. And I told my mom, I was talking to my mom last night because I'm like, Mom, please tell me I'm not completely crazy because this is what I remember. And she's like, well, what do you remember, Becky? I said, well, I'm not positive I remember it correctly. She's like, if you remember it, that is what you remember. Nobody can argue that with you. And I'm like, well, this is what I remember, Mom. I remember that after my uncle died, we found the sketch. He always sketched before he painted. I found that out after he died. He'd kind of draw out what he thought he was going to paint. You know, we found the sketch. And I'm like, Mom says, what did it say on it? And I said, it said Eileen. And she's like, yeah, it probably did. See, because that painting, when he drew that sketch, when I was looking at it after he died, I was looking at it and it said Eileen. He drew that when he wasn't in America. He was over in Germany. That was his sketch. He was drawing his dream of what he was praying and hoping for when he came home, which would be his wife, Eileen, the two of them to go. I truly believe that he was drawing what he was hoping would be the two of them hand in hand, walking down the path in the grass. My mom says there's a bridge in the picture. I don't remember the bridge, but I'll take her word for it that there's a bridge. But you know what? It turned it into some other thing because you know what? All of us grandkids, and I say grandkids because my cousin never had the kids. He always called us his grandkids too. Um, remember it as Susie and Bobby. My mom, Susie, my cousin, Bobby, holding hands and walking through with that picture. But you know what? He was eccentric. My uncle, he was. I'll have many of our other memories of him forever, but that painting still sticks out on the wall. And what I'm asking each of you is, do you have your own masterpiece, the one Jesus wrote for you in your heart, your painting? So we are going to close because I told Jim I'd be done right about 11:30. We're going to close with singing number 349, which is Complete in Thee.